Good morning and welcome to the Hibs Observer Saturday morning debrief for a change as we look back on Patrick's week in the Netherlands at Hibs pre-season camp, which of course rounds off today with a friendly against Ajax, friendly against Duisburg in midweek, triple sessions galore, players interviews, chats with David Gray, windmills, bikes, burst tyres on bikes, I'm led to believe. So we'll get into all that today. First of all, as always, a word for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Oh, and we seem to have lost Patrick this morning. Bear with us, folks. We did have some technical trouble during the week, who any of you would have joined us will have seen, but he's back with us now, Patrick. And he's gone again. So this is the peril of doing these things live, unfortunately. Yeah, Patrick, we'll just wait for him to come back in. He was in the Netherlands at the Hibs pre-season training camp this week. He was there from Monday to Friday, travelled back last week. If you've been following the website, you'll have seen plenty of interviews, plenty of content. He was at the friendly in midweek against Duisburg, got a look behind the scenes at training, spoke to players, spoke to David Gray. Hibs going through some pretty grueling triple sessions at their camp. And some pretty scorching heat, I'm led to believe, as well. 35 degrees, I think it touched on one of the days. So really being made to graft. He's back again.
This is great. Technical gremlins have followed me home.
They boarded that flight. They followed you all the way back to Scotland.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed we've got it sorted. So
yeah, we're going to have a go at it. If not, folks, I'll try. I don't know if anybody really would want to listen to me on their own, to be quite honest with you. But it might be all you're able to get if we can't keep Patrick's connection.
I've already been subjected to me and one this week, so I think it's only fair to get you if the technical problems continue. So
fair enough. Aye. So while you were gone, I was trying to almost kind of summarise your week for you. But why don't you do everybody a favour? Tell them about it yourself instead of me trying to tell it second hand. What was it like over in the Netherlands? What are you taking away from the pre-season camp?
Yeah, I think it's the main sort of takeaway for me was just how different it was this year compared to last year. Because I think 12 months ago it's David Gray's first pre-season. He's only really been in the job, I think, a matter of weeks by the time they went to the Netherlands last year. And with everything that comes with that, there's probably a little bit of nerves, a little bit of apprehension when you consider what he was sort of taking over. It had been a poor season. It led to the sacking of another manager, and just the expectations on a club of Hibs size and everything that comes with that. You think there must have been quite a lot of pressure on them last year, but this year, I mean, obviously the way the season ended with that third place finish and qualifying for Europe probably would have been. Probably would have helped to make it a more relaxed environment. And I think also the, getting a bit of transfer business done early with Jamie McGrath, Josh Mulligan, Raphael Salinger, and eventually Junior Hoylett all joining the training camp. I think that was really, probably helped sort of settle any kind of nerves there were. And it was just a really good week from the players' point of view. I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't agree with the triple sessions in 35-degree heat, but I think it's what you need to do at this time of year to kind of get ready. And Wednesday's friendly against Duisburg, a good kind of little way of breaking up the week, and then rounding off a sort of hard five days with the friendly against Ajax today, with that different test. But yeah, on a personal level, really entertaining would be one word, given the sort of various technical problems and as you mentioned in the introduction, the sort of transport issues in my bike suffering a puncture. Some weeks just lay it on you, and this week has been one of them. But yes, just hazards of the job. And the main thing is, again, as you mentioned, spoke to lots of players, got their take on last season, this season, the upcoming European games, and a chance just to speak to Gray himself just about where he feels things are at. Obviously, the Nectar saga. I think we can probably call it a saga now.
You making the
that's
call?
yeah. I think why not? So that's obviously like I think in terms of this whole getting the band back together approach that the clubs have taken, you've got Junior Hoylett back, you've got Rocky Bashiri signed up for another 3 years. That sort of focus on keeping as much of last year's squad together as possible, with a view to probably hitting the ground running in pre-season, and then when you get to the European games, and of course the start of the league campaign in August as well, is probably really important. So it's kind of, Triantis is kind of the big story now, I think, just in terms of whether the club will get him back, whether the player feels his future lies at the club in one way or another, and I'm sure there'll be more on that to come in the coming days. But no, a sort of very packed 5 days in the Netherlands, plenty of cycling about, plenty of hot weather, plenty of water drunk as well, plenty of sun cream used. Obviously the Hibs Observer fully condones taking things sort of like safe in the sun. So back home in Scotland now, weather is considerably cooler. But yeah, just I think a good week for the team and a good week for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on speaking to David Gray there, and the fact that he was speaking about Nectar Triantis, and he was quite firm about talking about, I mean, how much he enjoyed working with him, how highly he rates him as a player, how much he thinks he can still improve, but then also kind of saying, we can't wait around forever, really, on him making a decision, which is, it's kind of understandable. Like, Hibs have got to look after their own interests. It's Triantis as well as, he's entitled to look after his. I think, young player, 22, he's getting a chance to, go in and train with a Premier League squad. Now, I think he's kind of got to, he's kind of got to look at that as an opportunity. It doesn't mean, that he's shutting the door coming to Hibs, but, I think I kind of wrote yesterday, when he comes over from Australia to the UK, the kind of dream will be to, for these guys just to play in the Premier League. That's kind of what it's all about. That's the kind of pinnacle for a lot of young players. So he's got to approach that, I think, as a chance to go and impress. And then I think he's kind of right to think, well, we'll see go and do that and then see what happens from there. But then obviously from Hibs' perspective, they want to get business done as quickly as possible. But I think they'll probably, it'll be a kind of degree of, we can't wait forever, but some players are worth waiting a wee while for. It kind of leads into this question we got here from Bob. He said, "Hi gents, read the article from Gray about Nectar. Do we reckon he will try and get somebody else by the European game if Nectar hasn't signed for us by then?" So the Michelin game is, what are we, 19 days, 19 days out from that now. I mean, do you think Hibs will close the door on it that quickly? I mean, obviously, Triantis could turn around and say, "Actually, I know I agreed a deal somewhere else," or Sunderland could say, they could bump the price up. We don't know. I mean, anything could happen. But I mean, kind of assuming that, if it's still ongoing by then, do you think Hibs would close the door on it by the end of this month? I know it's kind of hard to, we're kind of speculating a wee bit, but it's a difficult decision, isn't it? It's like how long do you leave it?
Yeah, and whilst it's not the same, I think if you look at some of the signings that Hibs made last summer, for instance, somebody like Jack Iredale coming in on deadline day, and you look at the impact he had for the sort of like, from that kind of like end of November onwards, huge impact. And that's one of those things where maybe he was taking time to think about his future. Maybe he was not really on the radar to begin with. You just obviously a lot of moving parts when it comes to the transfer window. But that's just an example of you can if you sort of keep the door open, if you like, then you sometimes can get that sort of ideal fit. And from his point of view, they know that he fits well in the team. They know that he can handle the Scottish Premiership. They know that he can handle like big games. So again, these European matches, he comes back, then he's sort of well suited to a role in that. But the thing to remember is he's not had as much pre-season as sort of the current Hibs players have. I think he just returned to pre-season with Sunderland towards the tail end of this week here. And exactly, yeah. So from that point of view, even if something is done by then, it's questionable whether he would be physically in a position to be able to contribute the way that Hibs would want him to. So it's one of those where even if he is in by then, it's debatable how much of a role he would have to play. I think it'd be probably fairly unlike David Gray to just sort of pitch him in and hope for the best. Especially when you look at the way that the team is dealing with players in terms of like conditioning and just their overall health. I mean, the article you did with the head of performance, Tommy Scanlon, I think was very kind of clear about that, just about not kind of pushing players. We saw it in the Netherlands where the players who'd been on international duty weren't involved in the pre-season friendly against Duisburg purely because they weren't at the required level to be able to participate. So, I think it's so complex, but I think, as you say, it was a pretty kind of stern message from Gray. I think it was maybe a wee nudge. That gets back what he says. It gets back to the agent. It gets back to Triantis. Sunderland obviously be aware of it. Other clubs will be aware of it as well. And it wasn't quite sort of, it wasn't quite like here's a deadline. Let us know by then. But I think it was just we would like to know it sooner or later. But the other thing with Hibs is that they will be planning for for it not to happen. I think the fact they talked about it being a loan and saying he was always going to go back to Sunderland one way or another means that they probably will have there'll be a plan B, there'll be a plan C, because I think Hibs are a lot more organised these days when it comes to that. Particularly with transfer windows, you can never be sure with loan deals. And the other thing with loan deals is as well, you do sometimes have to wait until very late on in the window. Based on what teams are doing in terms of bringing other players in. The other part of this is that with every passing day, Sunderland seem to sort of spend 15 to 20 million pounds on like another central midfield player. So like that can't go on forever. But at the same time, you sort of, I think when you look at the players who Sunderland currently have in that position and the ones that they're bringing in, it probably is pushing Triantis down the pecking order a little bit. But I think my take on it is that you want a player who's ambitious enough, confident enough in his own abilities to say, I'm going to go into pre-season with this club that's just been promoted to the Premier League. I'm going to see where I stand. I'm going to try and make an impact and possibly try and change the manager's mind or give him something to think about at the very least. Now, maybe that's a tall order given that, Triantis hasn't played even that much football for Sunderland out with the Premier League. He's still young. There's maybe, we don't know how the Sunderland hierarchy sort of view the Scottish Premiership. Do they view it as, on a level with further down the EFL structure? Do they view it as, a good kind of stepping stone? We don't really know. So like I say, a lot of moving parts, but I don't think you can begrudge Triantis saying, look, I've had a really good season, team of the year awards, call up by Australia, even though he wasn't involved in the games. Perfectly entitled to say, why shouldn't I try my luck? Why shouldn't I see where I stand? But at the same time, I think, Gray saying we're not going to wait around forever for someone to make a decision was pretty clear. And sort of saying, if it comes, probably internally, if not sort of publicly, there will be a kind of soft deadline. And it's maybe, if we haven't heard by then what's going on, then it's time to move on because, obviously no one player is bigger than the club. So I think it probably comes down to, if they hear from Triantis's representatives that he is, I mean, maybe they already have that he's open to coming back, but he just needs to know where he stands with Sunderland, because it could be, does he go on another loan with a view to coming back and pushing next year, or is it, we're happy for you to leave permanently, and then it's all about sort of like hashing out a deal, on a fee, add-ons, etc. So it's one of those. I think it's a very complicated arrangement. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved when you think about Triantis, Hibs, Sunderland. But I think Gray was just sort of pretty clear that it can't sort of drag on forever. They need to know one way or another. And then as soon as they know what the story is, that's when they can pursue other targets if that's what they need to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sunderland there as well. They would probably be perfectly happy to, not for it to go on and on and on, but I mean from their perspective, if they are looking to sell, then they'd be happy to sort of encourage bids. It's not, they're not just going to, for a player who's he's young, who might be surplus to requirements there, we don't know, but he's young, his stock is rising, he's clearly got a lot of potential, he's on the verge of international recognition. If they do want to sell, they're probably not going to accept the first offer that comes their way. They're probably going to be happy to kind of play the market as well. So I think that factors into it too, kind of regardless of what maybe what Triantis wants to do, what Hibs want to do, Sunderland kind of do. They sort of hold most of the cards in this scenario. But as you say, it's Hibs all behind the scenes. They'll probably have a sort of soft deadline in mind as to when they would think, right, okay, we need to start exploring other options. Even if that's the case, that could kick something else into life. I could kick something else into gear. It's just have to wait and see. There is a long time left in the transfer window as well. There's plenty of time for things to change, other things to come up. I think Gray's always talked about, he's like, you want to be proactive in the market, but then sometimes opportunities come up that you weren't expecting. It's about being maybe agile. Is that maybe the right word to react to these things when they do come along? So it's as I said, there's a long way to go towards the end of the window, and pretty much, as we've seen before, pretty much anything can happen.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out when it comes to the European games as well. Gray doesn't strike me as the kind of person who will deviate from a plan at the last minute. So
yeah,
I think the training camp is obviously a chance for him to assess the central midfielders and say, right, this is what I'm going to go with for that game. And I think you can't obviously there's going to be certain occasions where you might think, oh, you know what, actually, if you've got a player who's been, struggling for fitness, who, can actually do half an hour, then that might change things up. But, you look at the central midfielders there at the moment, you've got Dylan Levitt, you've got, Alassane Amani, Jacob McIntyre played the full 90 minutes against Duisburg. There's options in there. Joe Newell's still a little bit away from being able to play. You've got Josh Campbell who can probably sort of play in there as well. So there are options in that midfield area. It's also worth addressing Gray's sort of love of flexibility, particularly when it comes to formations. That he's going into the Midtjylland away game, so the first leg, with a certain game plan. It might not be one where he needs sort of the two central midfielders of a certain type. It might be that he can play it slightly differently, that you can put other players in there. You've got Jamie McGrath who can come in, depending on the way you're playing. So it's, he's got a lot of options. He's got that flexibility, which, we know he likes. And, I think he will have a very clear sort of idea, even now, as you were saying, it's still sort of like nearly 3 weeks away to that first leg. But he just sort of strikes me as the kind of person who will want to have something in place well in advance and then sort of work on it and, sharpen up the players so they know what they need to do, and get to a stage where everyone knows where they need to be at any given time. And, being able to bring somebody in sort of 3 days before is going to, potentially upset that a little bit. So yeah, I think it is a saga. That's, I called it that. It is a saga because it is kind of running on, and we knew it would. I think the club knew it would. Gray sort of said that we knew it wasn't one that was going to be able to get done quickly, if there's something there to be done. So there's an awful lot to think about, but ultimately, the main sort of focus has to be on getting through this tie against Midtjylland, and that kind of has to come first. So I think that has to be the focus from Gray and his coaching staff at the moment. There's obviously pre-season games to come before then, which gives them a chance to try out different combinations in midfield, different formations, tactical approaches. And if something can get done in advance, then that's great. I think Triantis is obviously a player who keeps himself fit anyway. So if something is done in time, then you wouldn't be saying definitely not. But it's I think there's an awful lot going on to be able to sort of make any claims one way or another at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll see what happens on that front. Plenty of interesting developments to come, I would imagine. But for now, there's a Hibs game kicking off in just about an hour's time. David Gray's side taking on Ajax to round off their pre-season camp. So for now, folks, we're going to leave it there because we are going to be running live updates on the game on our website, hibsobserver.co.uk. So if you want to follow it on there, then please do get on that. We'll be yeah, we'll be back next week. Obviously, Hibs are back at Easter Road next week, friendly against Rotvice Essen. We'll have preview on that, a nice kind of feature on the visiting side. We'll be publishing that this early next week, so do look out for that as well. But for now, folks, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll speak to you again soon. Cheers.
Cheers.